the backdrop to this is later in that podcast, Kyle Shanahan talked about his experience interviewing with San Francisco, all of that. And he talked about a variety of things that he was looking for to get a head coaching job and all of that. And he said originally in the 4 teams he was interviewing for, San Francisco was the team that he personally was the least interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave that backdrop. And without further ado, Grant, what was your take when you heard that? What was your reaction? What did you think?
Well, it reminded me that the Niners were the worst job opening of that cycle. I mean, that was scorched earth. There was nothing. There was DeForest Buckner. That's what they had. And Armstead and Jimmy Ward. And people didn't even know about Jimmy Ward, really. There was no quarterback, no nothing. Kaepernick was on the way out. And no one wanted this job. So it seems like the Niners kind of lucked out in that Kyle Shanahan went to the Super Bowl and didn't get any other job. He made it clear he would have preferred to go other places. He interviewed at the Broncos. I know he did. Did he interview with the Rams?
He said Broncos, Jaguars, and 49ers in the podcast. I don't know what the 4th team was, but it's not only that. He also said something else, Grant. He made it very clear that he wasn't going to take a job unless he felt it was going to do right by him. So they were lucky that he also accepted the job.
That's true. No, I mean, the only way the Niners would have ever gotten Kyle Shanahan is if he were in the Super Bowl and he was the last one available, because he kind of got shut out from everywhere else. He basically, his only choice was the Niners. So he was in a compromised position, but the Niners were also even more desperate because he was the only guy left. And to get him, they were going to have to give him whatever he wanted. So what he got was not the place he thought he wanted, but a very desperate place that was willing to give him a blank check, basically, and let him write the terms of his contract. And he did.
Blake, what were your thoughts when you heard this?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the point that he made, the one thing he wanted the most, and this was because he watched his dad in Denver, and he's like, I need a good quarterback. That seemed like the just number one thing on his list, like, get me a quarterback and I'll figure out the rest. And well, they didn't really give him a quarterback. And they had, I think, the 31st offense and the 32nd defense. So yeah, I mean, I guess in a positive way, he got molded into whatever he wanted, which I think is kind of the untalked about positive. And, you know, he wasn't given maybe something that he'd have to makeshift and have a lot of expectations. He was given nothing, and he could kind of mold the team how he wanted. But I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you'd be hard pressed to find a worse spot than to be in Jacksonville. They just really have not been all that great the past decade. I'd say the Niners were probably more desirable than they were, because I think he wanted a few years too. Like, he didn't want like a 1 or 2 year thing. So I feel like the Niners probably weren't the worst. Like, I feel like Jacksonville would have to be worse.
I thought he wanted Denver because he grew up there. I mean, his dad coached there. It kind of would have been like coming full circle, but they didn't want him. Also, it's like John Elway has known Kyle Shanahan since Kyle Shanahan was like born, and Kyle Shanahan walked in there almost like a family friend, and John's like, "Listen, son, really like you, but not for us. We're gonna go with Vance Joseph." What?
If you remember, the reason that Denver job would have been so desirable for him is they won the Super Bowl running a similar style offense with Kubiak, and they did it with a quarterback in Peyton Manning who was not Peyton Manning when he won that Super Bowl. That defense was still loaded. They brought that defense back. It was stacked. It was still an excellent defense.
Yeah, they were in the middle of a revenge tour of their own over there.
Right. Kyle could have looked at that situation and said, all they need me is to fix the offense, and I can do a couple of tricks and make it work with Trevor Siemian, and I will make sure we can run the football. Right. And Denver would have been a Super Bowl team he might have thought from year one. But forget that. Denver went with Vance Joseph, who they perceived to be the next Mike Tomlin, which he clearly was not. But let's talk about Kyle in this job, right? So, Blake, I think you're right. I think Jacksonville, in theory, is a worse hiring spot. Because the Niners, one thing they do have is they have pedigree and history, right? 5 championships, Bill Walsh, Mike Holmgren, Mike Shanahan, Steve Mariucci, George Seifert. Like, the number of coaches, not just head coaches, that have come through the pipeline of the 49ers between Denny Green, 80s to the early 2000s is insane. It's insane. But I think the one thing that was a problem was it wasn't just Jim Harbaugh going. It was the 2 coaches in 2 years, 3 coaches in 3 years if you include Harbaugh, and then how bad the roster was. The fact that they were turning over a lot of the roster. If you remember, They turned over the roster in 2014 to try and rebuild it for Harbaugh and have one last hurrah with him. They went 8-8, and then they turned it over completely. And the Niners turned it over a third time with Kyle Shanahan because he didn't want all the guys that Trent Baalke picked to turn over the roster with. So they turned it over 3 times in 3 years. And then not just that. If you remember, the one thing that really should have been talked about was that was the worst run defense in NFL history.
Yes,
it starts with Jim O'Neill with a horrible scheme in terms of how they fit runs. But
it was the Red Sea.
It was the worst run defense in NFL history. Yeah. And Kyle Shanahan I think he put 300 on them. With that day at Levi's, he put 300 yards rushing, 300 yards passing.
Yes.
Without Julio Jones playing in that game. So he kind of knew how poor that defense was.
That wasn't at Levi's. That was in Atlanta, if I remember correctly.
Oh, it was in Atlanta?
In a dome. There was no Julio. It was like Aldrick Robinson and Taylor Gabriel and Tevin Coleman.
And Devontae Freeman.
Yeah. It was
the real killer was Thomas Rawls. Do you remember that guy on the Seahawks? He only lasted.
Oh, he was super good. Yeah, he was definitely good.
Calling him like the mini Marshawn, and I remember he dropped 200 yards on that defense.
He was dope.
Yeah,
he went for like 200 against the Niners, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, that was one of the games that made him mini Marshawn. Yeah,
I was at that game.
Absolutely. But if you look at it, he said that he called them, and he said even after the interview, he said he felt a lot better. He felt a lot better with this conversation with Jed and Prague, and he felt great about them. But he said he still called them and said, I have a list of things that I want. And he told his wife when he got back to his house, he said, I feel better about San Francisco. And she told him all the reasons he doesn't. But the funny thing was, he said he still had a list of wants that he wanted. And that wants, I'm assuming, was basically the control that he has. And he said once they returned his call and said that you can have the level of control you want, I think that's when it materialized. I thought it was interesting. The only thing I really thought was interesting about this conversation, because I'm assuming a lot of this happens in most head coaching cycles. Like, I'm sure not every coach is totally enthused with the teams that are available hiring them. The unfortunate reality is that you might not be the guy in the head coaching cycle. So when you're hot, you just got to strike when the iron's hot. But I was just shocked that he actually talked about it. And he talked about his entire thought process all the way to him sleeping and waking up 2 minutes before the Niners interview and throwing on his suit and putting water on his hair and going to it. It was very interesting.
I wonder why the Broncos didn't want him. That's the one thing. John, you knew him. I mean, you know him as well as anyone in the world. And you were like, nah, why? Is it hard to sell the Shanahan name in Denver?
No, I don't think it's that. But do you really want to hire a coach after having his dad? I mean, I was a kid, but I remember the circus it was with Mike Nolan trying to take over after his dad.
They hired Vance Joseph over Kyle, man. I mean, how did that happen? I mean, I understand.
They hired him not only over Kyle. I'm sure because Denver is considered to be a top class organization.
They are.
I think McVay was the first one to get hired in that cycle, if I remember correctly.
They missed on McDermott though. McDermott went to the Bills.
McDermott was in that cycle too.
Yeah,
it was got the short end of the stick.
Yeah,
they really messed up.
But Grant, I think the reason with Denver is like, do you really want Kyle Shanahan to take over his dad? Because like I brought up the Mike Nolan example. Do you remember Mike Nolan used to coach with a suit on?
Yeah, because his dad
did it.
Nolan, yeah.
That was, 6-year-old, 7-year-old.
So hold on, this possibly
so odd.
Or here's what I'm guessing, not guessing, but wondering. All my questions that I have about Kyle Shanahan, the stuff that isn't about X's and O's in offense, the other stuff. Well, maybe John Elway feels the same way. John Elway would know. So maybe there's that. But again, he hired Vance Joseph. So I'm not going to say like he had any brilliant insight here.